Welcome to the Trauma Resonance Resilience podcast, and I'm your host, Lisa Cherry, and I'm really looking forward to the session today. I feel very somber about what we're talking about, and the person I'm talking to, we arranged to do this a number of weeks ago, and in the last 24 hours, we have found that Sarah Everard's body has been found, and a police officer has been named and charged. So I want to start off by warning listeners that there are going to be references throughout this podcast to violence and abuse towards women, and I would say violence and abuse towards women and children. So if today's not the day for you to listen to this, then take that advice from yourself, because I think it's going to be quite an intense podcast. So let me introduce you to Madeleine Black, who has, and I'm going to read her bio directly, which I don't normally do, but I want to make sure that I read this in her words. So Madeleine Black has an unusual personal story which she uses to inspire and motivate others. She chose to forgive the two men who gang raped her at 13 years old, and she shares her story for many reasons. She wants to end the shame, stigma, and silence surrounding sexual violence, enabling others to find their voice, whatever their story is. She wants people to know that it's not what happens to us that is important, but what we do with it. She shows how changing her mindset tapped into her resilience and transformed her life, making people question their own thinking and encouraging them to see that there are always choices to make. And if we choose to, we can get past anything that happens to us in life, both professionally and in our personal life. She wants to encourage others to live their life courageously too, but ultimately she wants to inspire hope and show people that we are all so much stronger than we think we are. The sharing of her story publicly on the Forgiveness Project's website in September 2014 opened many doors for Madeleine in ways she never imagined, and the invitations started to pour in. Many women and men got in contact and explained how reading her story gave them strength, hope, and a different perspective of what's possible in their lives. She's taken part in both TV and radio interviews and has been interviewed to share her story of being gang raped as a teenager at conferences, book events, and schools. She recognises that she was a victim of a crime that left her silent for many years, but she has now found her voice and intends to use it, not just for her, but for so many others who can't find theirs yet. She has won several awards and is also a 2 times TEDx speaker. Please welcome Madeleine to the podcast. Hello, Madeleine.
Hi, Lisa. Lovely to be here with you.
It's so lovely to have you here. And of course, we did book this weeks ago, and it just feels so poignant that we're having this conversation today. And I want to open up with you with a hashtag that I think both of us feel really uncomfortable about. And I just want, the hashtag is she was just walking home. And I want to ask you, were you just walking home?
I wasn't just walking home. I had gone to a cafe with a friend. Both of us had lied about where we were staying, which I'm sure most teenagers have done at one point in their lives. We're meant to be staying with her grandma, but her mum was away, so we went back to her empty flat and we bought a bottle of vodka, which I've never been able to drink or even smell again. And I was 13, so literally half the size I am now. I'd never drunk before, and it didn't take me long to get drunk. Soon I was just chucking up all over the place. And two of the young men at our table put us into a taxi to take us back to her friend's mum's empty flat.
Yeah. And I think that when we see a hashtag like that, there's still something about it that it's about her.
Yes.
She was just walking home. And that is what is so ingrained in our culture, this notion that it's about her in some way.
Yeah, all the language. She was raped. he was murdered, he was walking home. We don't say a man raped a woman, a man murdered someone. It's always she was. And yeah, I feel very uncomfortable with that hashtag, she was just walking home. So if she was a sex worker and she was leaving her place of work that night, would we look at it differently? Or if she had been drunk and was coming home from a club, just because she was walking home, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. You know, women are murdered, raped in all types of circumstances, not just on a walk home. In fact, it's only accounts for about 8% of murders of women are by a stranger on a walk home. Most women will know their attackers because home really is not the safest place for a lot of women.
Yeah. And when I read your bio, I mean, it's really, I'm imagining lots of women are listening to this, and I think, like you, sharing about experiences is always about supporting, challenging, empowering, inspiring, enabling people to be able to talk about things that are really difficult to talk about. And you'll know that I talk about all sorts of things, but I haven't ever talked about that stuff. And your 13-year-old experience, I had that 13-year-old experience, right down to the bottle of vodka, being away, having lied about where I was, all of that stuff. And I wonder how many women have these experiences and somehow they just sit one on top of the other until there is, I mean, if we think about violence towards children in that way, which we both were, how that is normalized within and then carried into early adult relationships and things that we might accept that are unacceptable, and the whole spectrum of that, from start to finish, how that creates these narratives that support a power dynamic that's so entrenched that the Met Police have silenced women even expressing their sadness.
Yeah, sadly, I know my story is not uncommon, and it became even more obvious once I started to speak out because so many people would say, gosh, you could be writing my story. I lied, I had this, I did that, or I found myself drunk in the gutter one night, it could have been me. And I had even hid memories from myself because we know our mind just shuts down trauma. And only when I was writing my book in my late early 50s that I discovered I'd been raped 3 more times before I was 18. Very different to the first time, but it's never about comparison. It doesn't matter if it was less violent or more violent because it's all a total violation of our body, regardless of the level of violence used. And I thought, I didn't know that. And a lot of people will say to me, they really resonate with those chapters, which is called And Again, and Again, and Again in my book, because they went, I never thought that was rape. I just said no. And he carried on. I went, did you consent? Did you agree? Well, no, I just thought it'd just be easier just to go along with it. So all of these ways that we minimize it, and it really became obvious as I was writing about it more that, gosh, that's 5 men now that have raped me. And I never saw that for years. So yeah, sadly, my story is your story is somebody else's story. Everyone I know has a story of inappropriate behaviour or sexual assault to some level. I mean, the Guardian did an article yesterday. It said 97% of all young women. I just think there's 3% just clicked the wrong button by mistake. I think 100% of all women will have experienced something that has made them feel really not safe.
Mm. And why are we talking about this now? I mean, what's different? I mean, it's a very provocative question because we can see what's different, when you're thinking about why we're able to talk about this, why there is a fundraiser from Reclaim These Streets, that has well, I looked just a few moments ago and it was up to 90,000. It's fantastic, raising funds for different women's services. Do you think that all women would have provoked such a response?
But again, would all women?
Would all women that this had happened to? Because I'm not so sure. I mean, you've already alluded to that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because unfortunately, what happened to Sarah, I think, is unusual. It's not common, and then there is a police officer who's now been charged. So it's sensationalism, isn't it? It's drama. You know, the thousands of women that are raped every night in their homes. We don't talk about them, or the women that are at risk, or the children that are at risk. This has been going on all the time. So why do we identify with this young 33-year-old pretty white woman walking home one night when we can't identify with all the other millions of women? Both cases are tragic, but it's been going on for so long already. Why? I don't understand why we've suddenly woken up to this one and we haven't woken up to everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, when we're thinking about class, race, context, you know, there is unfortunately a hierarchy of around which lives matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
To kind of coin that phrase. But I honestly think that there is a moment here that, you know, something is shifting. I think lots of things are shifting. I think the pandemic has just brought to the fore and flipped in the air all the things that are not okay in the world. And I think this is a moment in time. I hope. I really hope.
So too, I really do. It would be, I mean, a lot of people are posting about it. Social media is flooded with it. Friends of mine, male and female, are posting about it, some for and some against. You know, some very misogynistic views saying, well, they are the weaker sex, they should stay in. And think, well, no amount of safety advice is going to change the issue, because the issue is not with women, the issue is with men. And it's not about staying home or protecting yourself or becoming kick-ass, you know, karate, whatever, which I am anyway, but it's not about safety advice, it's about men not raping and murdering us.
Mm. And some of that is about, I guess, how men collude with one another. And I think what we are going to find with this Met Police case is collusion. I can't quite pick up what's going on, but 2 other officers have been arrested around an indecent assault. I think what's going to unravel is some kind of collusion that we might argue is about systemic misogyny in the Met Police. Might we suggest that that's possible?
It's in the Met Police. I think, I mean, it's been a bit of a week, really. Obviously, with Meghan and Harry's interview, we've seen classism, racism, sexism, misogynistic behaviours are really not far from the surface. It is, you know, it's really ingrained in our society, and it doesn't take much for it all to come rising up. We've seen it all this week, which I think is why some ways it's very exhausting being a woman and speaking out against this again, but in some ways it just shows me, yeah, we've still got a lot of work to do. A lot of work. Mental health, anti-mental health, I mean, it's been everything this week.
I think that's why I woke up this morning just so exhausted. I literally and this just kind of felt like it sits on top of so much, you know, and it's intense right now. It's really intense. And that highlighting of everything that you're talking about, if that interacts with your experience in any kind of meaningful way, you're going to be really feeling tired right now. And I do honestly think that rest is a radical act. You know, that we have to rest sometimes, don't we, from
Yeah, I would absolutely take a break from social media if it's making you upset, angry, triggered. But I think, you know, I know in the beginning when the first lockdown happened, so many people got in contact to say that all these memories are resurfacing and returning. What do I do? How do I stay okay with it? Because I think when we're forced to isolate and be with ourselves, all the games that we play, which is our survival tactics of avoiding and distracting, we can't do that anymore. So many people had trauma just resurfacing, unprocessed trauma. So I think this just taps into all that unprocessed trauma, and you see it from where you're at.
I think that's such an important point for anyone who's listening. And of course, one of the ways that you might notice that trauma is resurfacing in that way is if you are self-medicating in some way. You're drinking more, you're perhaps taking drugs, whether they're legal or illegal, you're perhaps excessively online shopping, or something that tells you, that indicates to you that you are trying to suppress stuff that's coming up. And all I can say is that if that's happening, there are places that you can call for help. And actually, alcohol and drug abuse has gone up hugely during the pandemic. And because I see addiction and alcoholism as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue, then that lens tells me that that's about dealing with unresolved, unprocessed trauma.
Absolutely, I did it for years to numb out and to not feel and to not think. But a lot of people have told me as well they've got a lot of unwanted images, a lot of unwanted memories. It's hard to sleep again, waking up, not even being able to get to sleep. So that all suggests as well it's all unprocessed, and it's in some ways it's really good that it's coming up because it shows you where your work is, but and then it's really tough because you think, well, that's exactly where my work is. So it's a real paradox, isn't it? It's really tough to get these memories coming back, especially when you didn't choose for them to come back. When they have, it's kind of, I think they've been brought up because of the situation. I don't know if they would naturally occur right now or not. Who knows?
And it's knowing where to go. I mean, you know, I'm always very grateful if something shows up for me to deal with, you know, because I've spent years dealing with what shows up. I'm very comfortable with that. It's not frightening. I know that that's work to do, but if that you're at the beginning of that journey, then it might well be frightening. And also, where do you go? Where do you go when those things come up?
And I'm the same as you. I just think, okay, that's a little bit of residue left behind. That's exactly where I have to dive into and clean up. I feel like I'm just draining the swamp. Hopefully one day it'll be drained.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, staying with that theme, that's where we're at, I think, as a society, you know, whatever's, it's showing up, and you can feel people wanting to hold on to what some people have called the old order, but you can feel people wanting to hold on to that rather than release it and think about, okay, what is a new way of being? Because this way of being does not work for most people and hasn't done for a very, very long time. So how do we think about how we move forward? You know, and I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
It is really hard to know how to move forward. I think what we really need to do is kind of go backwards to education, to really start from a young age, nursery, primary, about consent, healthy relationships, respect, because it's an issue for all of us. It's not just a women's issue. You know, violence against women is violence against humanity. It affects all of us. We bring men into the world. You know, it's they're born because of us, so it affects everyone. But the one thing that has been good, not that I don't agree with that we need to change, give out any safety advice, but for men to really understand what it is like for women. So all the women that are posting about, you know, my mum told me to put my keys in my fingers, have a copy of a magazine in my bag so I can slice their face, or have some spray that I could spray them with, or, you know, looking over my shoulder, crossing the road, the texting. And I do that as well. Text me when you're home. Text me when I do it to my kids, and even friends do, you know, let me know when you're back and I'll let you know when I'm back. It's so normal, isn't it?
Yeah, I certainly remember walking with keys in between my knuckles. Quite what I'd have done with them, I don't know, dropped them, I suspect, but um, but yeah, you know, all of those little things that you do without even thinking that are about keeping yourself safe. this is already a very different interview than the one I had in mind when I asked you to come on the podcast, in the sense that, I'm really interested in your, there's that moment. And I suppose I say this, I'm asking you this because we share that similar space, really, which is there was a moment where we had to write our story, but there was also equally a moment where we didn't care if it was public or not. And because we both have written in published works about those things, and I'm wondering what that journey looked like for you, and if there were similarities. But what was that moment, and how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, so for a long time, I did maybe speak out, but if they asked, could they take a photo, could they put my name? I said, oh, no way. So I would be one of those silhouetted faces in a newspaper magazine, Madeleine, whatever, 40 London. That's all it said. I took part in a campaign for Rape Crisis Scotland that said, this is not an invitation to rape me. I was happy to share my story, and that was still the shame from that trauma. It was just huge, the idea of people knowing what had happened. But it's a process. It's not a sprint, is it really? It's a marathon. It takes a long time to heal. And I was actually in Scotland, where I live in Glasgow, and somebody from the Forgiveness Project had come up to speak. And normally all their events are in London. An amazing woman called Marion Partington, who wrote a book, If You Sit Very Still. So her sister Lucy had been murdered by Rose and Fred West, the serial killers. And just as she was speaking, I just saw the impact that she had on the audience. She just emanated this peace. It was just amazing. And I bought her book at the end of the night, and inside she'd written, now you must speak. And I thought, yeah, I could do that actually. And I thought, where has that come from? If you told me that years ago, I'd never believe it. And the moment I made that decision, the words just appeared literally at night. I couldn't sleep. They'd all be flying around my head. And I would just sit down and write them. And in about 8 weeks, there were like 70,000 words. And I thought, kind of like a book now. I thought, I can get a publisher. And I was very lucky. Something has always supported me. I don't know where it's coming from. And about 3-4 months later, I had a contract. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's when I first shared it, but with the Forgiveness Project, 2014, I just thought, I'm so tired of hiding, so tired of being ashamed for a crime that's committed against my body that had nothing to do with my clothing or the alcohol I drank or being in a bar and not telling my parents. It just came down to the fact these 2 men chose to rape me. But that journey, I say it very flippantly, that's taken a lot of time for me to work that out. And now I don't have any shame anymore because I'm not what they did to me. I'm not the events in my life. All of us are so much more than what happens to us. I'm not my body. So now I just think, if I can speak out, it's almost my duty. I feel a responsibility because I know what that shame is like. It's so crippling and disabling. It just held me back for so many years that now I won't be quiet anymore. I can't be. It's just taken a long time to find my voice, but now I think it is my power, or it's my purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there is something very particular about shame when it intersects with stigma as well. There's something about carrying shame of a whole range of events. I mean, I was drowned in shame, literally drowned in shame, being born out of wedlock and to a 20-year-old who, then had to have me in a mother and baby unit, and my gran was a Catholic, and you can just imagine, I mean, the shame was just profound in 1970 for those experiences. And so every situation thereafter was just a compounding of that sense of shame, and a number of those things intersected with stigma. And in fact, I think all of those things did. So you're not just grappling with the sensation of shame and unworthiness, you're grappling with that in the context of society deciding that that you're also not worthy because, let's face it, babies born outside of wedlock used to be called bastards. And then thinking about whether you're, using alcoholism, drug addiction, being in care, being imprisoned, using mental health services, being assaulted, being abused as a child. I mean, all of these things, and you just see the layering of all of those experiences and then how society chooses to see them. I mean, do you think we're at a point where, because people will speak out and because there is social media and because silence is no longer an option for so many people, that we're actually at a point where that's an opportunity to reduce stigma and say, that this has been part of human experience?
Yeah, well, the irony is we've stigmatized all of the issues that you spoke about, yet so many people fall into those categories. I mean, who doesn't know someone that's had mental health issues or been sexually assaulted? And it's kind of the good and the bad thing about social media, especially right now. Women are listing the so many ways they've been assaulted. Started at 10, and this one flashed at me, and this one, groped me, and this one did this, and there's lists and lists. So in some ways, it's great to see they're so open. In some ways, it's so depressing to see just the reality of what we have to go through on a daily basis. Really, it's different now in lockdown because I don't really go out, so we're not really exposed to that. But yeah, it's a real paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
We stigmatize all of these issues, and yet most people will have experienced these issues.
I wonder if the whole idea around women's sexual violence and abuse is something that is so shared. I mean, like you've just said, if you wrote a list, if I wrote a list of all the things that had happened from the age of 8, in relation to abuse by men, violence by men, that's a very long list. I mean, right the way through. I mean, I'm talking about the little stuff and the big stuff, right? Luckily, the big stuff, there isn't huge amounts of the big stuff. The little stuff goes on and on and on. Not being able to go out for a walk, being catcalled continuously, and then being called names when you don't turn around. All of that stuff and all of the control over your sexual behavior, the way the type of relationships you might have, what sort of relationships are acceptable and what are not. All of that noise just kind of travels with you across your life. And if it sits with all of that other stuff, it's very messy. It's a very messy space to unpick. It's so entrenched, a lot of it, isn't it?
It's so messy, isn't it? And so many of us have had this messy journey. Yeah, I don't really know the answer at all. I don't know if you have any ideas how how do we make change? I mean, maybe this is great. Maybe because it is bringing it all up, people will become more aware, and the good men will really pay attention, because we need allies. We need people on our side. It's not a women's issue, as I said before. It's on all of us. It really is.
I agree. And in terms of, having the answers to these really big questions, I don't have the answers either. But I do know that by keep talking about stuff, I do know that by understanding trauma and having a trauma lens, as a way of understanding systems, people, services, the way that everything is designed is almost designed in ways that facilitate harm in this way. The more we highlight that, the more we talk about that, the clearer we get about what we will and won't accept anymore. The more we work together, the more we stand together and are connected together, we make a difference. I mean, just as I said earlier, just thinking about the fundraiser, next time I look, who knows what that'll be at. We're not standing here alone. We're standing here together. And as you say, with many men, men who are brave and courageous and will acknowledge that they are operating within the system of patriarchy and misogyny, and that stand up and say, I don't want to be in that. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something different.
Yeah. Oh, we definitely need more men on our side. Absolutely. It shouldn't be about sides. Yeah, we need to I don't know. I don't have the answers either, but I feel like you say this is a shift. Something feels very different. There's a lot of anger and a lot of sadness around at the moment. But yeah, it feels like a shift, hopefully in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. I am going to make sure that there are lots of links in the episode notes. And, you know, at the risk of sounding like a news item, if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've talked about here, please take a look at the links and also get in touch, you know, with either me or Madeleine, but get in touch with local services that can help you. Madeleine, you were keen that there was another service that was mentioned, I think. Was that Rape Crisis?
Yeah, rape crisis, UK wide or Scottish wide or England, there'll be a national helpline number.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you.
You're welcome. Thank you.